Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something really cool. We are attempting a full-on cinematic breakdown of one of history's most profound, widely studied texts. We're going to look at the opening of the Bhagavad Gita, but not just as ancient scripture. We're looking at it as an absolute masterclass in scene setting, character psychology, and intense political tension. We're going to break down the anatomy of this opening scene, specifically the very first 5 shlokas, or verses, to see exactly how the stage is set before a single weapon is even drawn. Let's get into it.
So you might be wondering, how does the greatest epic of ancient India actually begin? Think about the most gripping opening scene of your favorite blockbuster movie. You know the formula, right? You need sky-high stakes, immediate tension, and a crystal-clear understanding of exactly who is on the board. Well, the Bhagavad Gita opens right on the precipice of a devastating world war, on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. The negotiations? Totally failed. The armies are gathered, and the tension is literally thick enough to cut with a knife. It is a powder keg just waiting for a spark.
To truly understand how this masterpiece kicks off, here's our roadmap for today. First, the blind king's inquiry. 2, the prince's strategic move. 3, the Pandava army formation. 4, profiling the enemy warriors. And 5, preparing for the storm.
All right, starting right off with Section 1, the blind king's inquiry.
Consider this our establishing shot. We aren't actually starting down in the mud and the noise of the battlefield. No, we're starting far away, in the quiet, super tense halls of the palace. The focus here is on King Dhritarashtra and his visionary reporter, Sanjaya. Now, our source material points out something crucial. Because the king had absolutely no desire to see the slaughter of his own family with his own eyes, the sage Vedavyasa gave Sanjaya, the king's trusty counselor, this incredible gift of divine, transcendent vision. Basically, it allows Sanjaya to describe all the happenings of the war live directly to the king. And the king opens the entire epic by asking this: Sanjaya, gathered on the sacred soil of Kurukshetra, eager to fight, what did my children and the children of Pandu do? He's zooming right in on the macro setting here, the sacred battlefield of Kurukshetra.
Now, what is really fascinating here is the highly specific language the king uses. Look at this contrast. He doesn't just say, what did the armies do? He specifically asks what my children and the children of Pandu did. In the original Sanskrit, he uses the word mamaka for his own sons. He's drawing this incredibly sharp verbal line between his immediate family and his brother Pandu's family. And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates the king's deep psychological division. I mean, even though they are all technically one family, the Kurus, his blinding attachment to his own sons sets the underlying tone of division for this entire conflict. The physical war hasn't begun, but the war has absolutely already started in the king's mind.
Moving on to Section 2, the prince's strategic move. Now we're shifting our POV. Through Sanjaya's divine vision, we cut from that quiet palace directly to the front lines, landing squarely on our primary antagonist, King Duryodhana, the son of Dhritarashtra. Verse 2 drops us right into the action. Sanjaya reports back to the blind king, saying, "At that time, seeing the army of the Pandavas drawn up for battle and approaching Dronacharya, King Duryodhana spoke these words." Notice the immediate action going on here. Duryodhana takes one look at the enemy lines, and what is his very first instinct? He moves. He physically walks straight over to his teacher, Dronacharya.
So the million-dollar question here is, why does he do that? This is actually a massive moment of political maneuvering and, frankly, deep insecurity. Think about it. Duryodhana actually has the numerically superior army. On paper, he totally has the upper hand. Yet the second he sees the Pandavas' formation, his immediate reaction isn't to step up and issue some brave battle cry to his troops. No, it's to seek out his military guru. It completely reveals this hidden layer of anxiety just bubbling beneath his confident royal exterior. It's basically the ancient equivalent of marching into your boss's office to point out a rival department's success, just because you need validation. He's desperate to make sure his key commanders are completely 100% focused.
And that brings us to Section 3, the Pandava army formation.
So now we're looking directly through Duryodhana's eyes at the enemy. We're diving right into Shloka 3 to analyze the exact, highly calculated words Duryodhana uses the moment he reaches his master. Looking at the original Sanskrit text from our source, which really validates the historical weight of this whole observation, Duryodhana says, "Behold, master, the mighty army of the sons of Pandu, arrayed for battle by your talented pupil, Drishtayumna, son of Drupada." Now, on the surface, sure, he's just pointing out the enemy's strength. But beneath the surface, it is an absolute masterclass in psychological manipulation.
Let's unpack the sheer passive aggressiveness going on here. Duryodhana is taking this moment to deliver a wildly pointed political jab at his teacher. First off, he points out how quote-unquote mighty the enemy army is, clearly trying to stoke a little bit of fear. Then he makes sure to highlight the brilliant strategic deployment by Drishtadyumna. And finally, here comes the ultimate twist of the knife. He reminds Drona that this enemy commander is actually Drona's very own talented pupil. It's as if Duryodhana is looking at him and saying, hey, look at this massive threat staring us down. And oh, by the way, master, it's your own brilliant teaching that empowered them to do it. He is actively forcing his teacher to confront the harsh reality of the situation, making sure Drona won't hold back just because he has some lingering affection for his former students on the opposing side.
Next up, Section 4, Profiling the Enemy Warriors.
Okay, so now that Duryodhana has Drona's full, probably very uncomfortable attention, he pivots into a detailed threat assessment. He starts identifying the key players on the opposing side, basically to prove just how serious this situation really is. Spanning verses 4, 5, and 6, Duryodhana rattles off this extensive, incredibly intimidating list of names to Dronacharya. If you look at the source text, it's just a relentless barrage of heavy hitters. He wants to make absolutely sure that his own side doesn't underestimate the sheer firepower standing right across the field from them.
To really grasp what Duryodhana is doing here, imagine it like a modern analytical threat board. He kicks things off by setting the benchmark, saying these enemies are wielding mighty bows and equal in military prowess to Bhima and Arjuna, who, by the way, are the two most feared fighters around. Then he lists them, Yudhana, Urata, and Drupada. He names Drishtaketu, Chikitana, the valiant king of Kasi, Purujit, Kuntibhoja, and Savya, who he specifically goes out of his way to call the best of men. He points out the mighty Udamanyu, the valiant Uttamaja, Abhimanyu, and the 5 sons of Draupadi. And what is the terrifying label he applies to every single one of them? Maharathis. Now, a Maharathi isn't just a regular soldier. This is a warrior chief, a supreme fighter capable of battling tens of thousands of ordinary soldiers simultaneously. Duryodhana is basically pointing at the enemy lines and saying, look, they have an entire front row of literal weapons of mass destruction. And finally, Section 5, Preparing for the Storm. Let's zoom back out for a second and look at what this incredibly masterfully written text has accomplished in just 5 short verses. The stakes are flawlessly set. We've seen this deep-seated psychological division in the palace through the blind king's incredibly biased words. We've been thrust right out onto the battlefield to witness the raw anxiety and complex political dynamics of a prince who is frantically trying to manage his commanders before a single arrow is even fired. And this is why it all matters. The Gita isn't just delivering some abstract philosophy in a vacuum. It completely grounds its supreme wisdom in very real, very human emotions: fear, duty, crippling attachment, and just overwhelming pressure. We, the readers, have been perfectly primed for the explosive events that are about to go down.
All of this leaves us with one highly critical question. We've seen this massive, genuinely terrifying Pandava threat arrayed on the battlefield, and we've definitely felt Duryodhana's anxiety. But who stands with the Kauravas? How does Duryodhana's own army actually stack up against all these Maharathis? Well, that is exactly what we are going to uncover in our next explainer as we continue this cinematic breakdown. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I'll catch you in the next one.